The result is that the team does not have a name on the map. The name Wild Chicken Thigh was given by us spontaneously when we chose it. The story is that at the end of September 1972, our team, consisting of 6 people led by Lieutenant Colonel Nguyen Chi Thop, deputy commander of Battalion 35, was preparing the battlefield. We were looking for a way to penetrate into the plains of Phong Gian District, Thua Thien Province. After crossing the forest entrance for about 20 minutes, we came upon barren hills, scattered with sim bushes and patches of grass and straw, stretching all the way to National Route 1. It was around 3 p.m., still too early to cross these barren patches, so we found some cover in the bushes and waited for dusk. Everything around us was incredibly quiet. Rarely do you experience such peace in the battlefield. No sounds of artillery, no helicopter gunships, or the whirring of OV-10 planes. Only the breeze from the mountains and the fading sunlight gave the landscape a golden hue. In the distance, we could hear the call of wild chickens, their cries drifting in the dusk. The sound was so haunting and peaceful, it made us feel a deep sense of serenity. We all listened intently to the wild chickens and acknowledged that nature here would be beautiful, not for the enemy stronghold positioned on Hill 105, which resembled a mountaintop stripped of its sweetness, worn and eroded like a bald head, blocking the western side of the barren hill area. At that moment, I wished there were no war. We had to wait until after 4 p.m. to continue our journey. We followed the northern bank of the Mai Shan River for about 30 minutes until we came across a small abandoned village. Only 5 or 6 house foundations remained, with broken bricks scattered across the ground. The village faced the river, and behind it were lush green tea hills. At the end of the village stood a small offering bowl and a shrine, with incense sticks still burnt, blackened, and rotting. The local people had been forced by the enemy to relocate to the eastern bank many years ago, leaving behind abandoned gardens and broken homes. The village stretched about 600 meters, and we discovered a tank track running from the riverbank, winding through the hills and disappearing under Hill 105. Lieutenant Thap ordered the group to stop about 100 meters from the road, where we could smell smoke wafting in the air. He signaled for me to go with him to investigate. We crawled toward the suspicious road. About 5 meters ahead, we observed 3 large round stones, each the size of a grapefruit, surrounding a pile of ash. Upon closer inspection, we noticed smoke rising from one end of a pile of still burning wood. Nearby, there was a pile of bamboo shoots and a can of food. After a careful look around, we didn't detect anything suspicious, so Lieutenant Thap told me to go back and gather the others. We quickly crossed the tank track. As we passed, I noticed a large pile of bamboo shoot shells, 1 can of 250-gram size, and 56 plastic bags of dried rice, probably leftovers from the enemy's cooking. 30 minutes later, we arrived at Tan Bien Village, located on the northern bank of the river. This village had also been abandoned long ago. Only withered old jackfruit trees remained, and there was no sign of life except for the lush green clumps of bamboo by the riverbank, their trunks fat and full, casting long shadows on the clear water. We chose a secluded plot of land near the riverbank to rest. Our mission was to find a way to destroy the enemy's ammunition and fuel depots deep in the plains. While we were carrying out this mission, Lieutenant Thap received orders to return to headquarters to take on a new task. Lieutenant Thap, along with a staff officer and a soldier, had left the evening before, and by the next afternoon we found that he was still at the military post. To our surprise, he had stayed there all night. Lieutenant Thap asked urgently, "Where did the troops position themselves last night?" I replied, "I didn't see anything when I passed here yesterday." He said, "The enemy deployed troops on a hill near the small village on the other side of the road. They must have just arrived this morning." I then asked, "Is it the hill where we waited in the evening, listening to the wild chickens?" Lieutenant Thap nodded. "Yes, that's the one." After a brief pause, I suggested, "How about we name it Wild Chicken Thigh for convenience, guys?" Lieutenant Thap laughed and said, "That sounds good." He then turned to us and said, "You guys rest. This afternoon we will go there and check it out." That's how the name Wild Chicken Thigh came to be. Initially, it was just used within our group, but eventually it spread throughout the battalion and became an official term. Whenever someone mentioned it, everyone knew exactly where it was and what had happened around that area. In the afternoon, we took advantage of the enemy's carelessness. Lieutenant Thap, along with Lieutenant Thuk, Lieutenant Don, and I, crossed the tank road. Wild chickens were hidden among the T-hills. We used binoculars to observe the enemy on the hills. These T-hills, which the locals had planted decades ago, had been left untended for years. The branches and leaves grew wildly, covering the ground. Suddenly, a helicopter passed by, its rotor blades whipping the air like a violent storm, making the tea plants sway as though they wanted to uproot. Lieutenant Thap reminded everyone to be extra cautious of the helicopters. From our position in the T-hills, we still had to cross another hill before reaching the enemy's position. Both hillsides had been scorched by the enemy, leaving behind charred tree trunks. On the wild Chicken Thigh Hill, the enemy was digging trenches. There were even tents set up in a circular formation. Observing the enemy, I told Lieutenant Thap, "They are quite numerous." Lieutenant Thap confirmed, "More than 30 of them. They are probably scouts. If they stay here for a long time, it will cause us trouble. We need to strike, and tonight is the best time since they haven't set up proper defenses yet." Lieutenant Thap's quick decision became our collective resolve. By 8 p.m., we had gathered at the base of the wild Chicken Thigh Hill. There were 8 of us, each carrying an AK rifle with 2 magazines of ammunition. Lieutenant Thap had a K-59 pistol, while Lieutenant Thuk carried a K-54 pistol along with an AK rifle. He said, "For battles, AKs are necessary for full force." Despite the tension, his calm demeanor reassured us. Our plan was to target one of the tents. We estimated there were 5 to 6 enemy soldiers in each tent, and with a 600-gram explosive grenade, we could easily eliminate them. However, we still prepared 2 grenades each in case of unexpected situations. Additionally, each of us had 2 attack grenades and 1 or 2 captured U.S. grenades. With this gear and our strength, we were confident that we could carry out the night attack on the enemy's positions. At 9 p.m., Lieutenant Thap double-checked everyone's equipment and signaling. He then assigned Lieutenant Don to lead the way. Lieutenant Don, the platoon leader, had been in the battlefield since 1970 and had extensive combat experience. I was the team leader, right behind him, with Hoa, a soldier known for his large physique and bravery, following closely. We crawled through the shrubs, now burned down to bare trunks, barely thicker than our fingers. The wind from the plains blew cold across the slopes, making the dry branches snap together, creating a faint sound. By 9:30 p.m., we were near the enemy's trench area. Lieutenant Thap ordered the team to stop and move closer to the hilltop. There were no more chest-high bushes, only sparse patches of sim bushes covering the ground. The tents were unlit, and there were no guards posted, creating an eerie silence. This unusual stillness made us suspicious. I thought to myself, could they really be this careless? We sat still and listened carefully, but there was no sign of movement from the enemy guards. Lieutenant Thap then instructed me to move up and inspect the trench. He reminded me to be cautious. Hoy volunteered to join me as we crawled up to the trench. We peered into the trench and found that it was shallow, with a personal sleeping mat still lying inside. Hoa whispered to me, "In a while, I'll grab the grenade from my pouch and throw it." I didn't respond, keeping quiet. I picked up a small stone and threw it to signal to Lieutenant Thap. He ordered the team to move closer to the trench. At 10 p.m., we began to implement the combat formation. But then, a seasoned military officer, after several battles, decided to check the 2 remaining tents. He asked Lieutenant Don and me to inspect them. After we moved to the tents and listened closely, we could hear nothing. No breathing, snoring, or movement. I crept closer to the tent door, lifted the flap slightly, and pressed my ear to the opening to feel for any warmth. I could smell sweat, cigarette smoke, and gunpowder. Everything was cold and still. We pulled the flap wide open and looked inside. To our shock, the tent was completely empty. We quickly returned to report to Lieutenant Thap. He ordered us to check the remaining tents. We did a final sweep and confirmed that none of the tents contained any enemies. Lieutenant Thap then gave the order to retreat. We quickly withdrew, staying alert for any traps or ambushes set by the enemy outside. We followed the same route and swiftly made our way back to our position. The trench had a hole underneath. "Hey, Hoa, the guy's planning to stay at the hotel. His age is close to yours and the Westerner. You take care of it. Tomorrow he will know you are coming. The concern is that what he said earlier actually happened on the battlefield, and often occurs when our tactical plans are exposed. The enemy pretends not to know anything, but by night, they quietly withdraw from the base and set up an ambush. When our raid is about to end, they break through the encirclement, forcing the door open and retaliating with light weapons, having used up everything for the last attack. The remaining ammunition is barely enough, and our soldiers can only fight until their last breath, bravely sacrificing themselves. This is a bitter lesson learned to prevent the enemy from outsmarting us in future operations. We kept watch on them, selling them false information and bait until they were about to leave. But that night we did not encounter any bad luck as we initially feared. They seemed like rookies in a strange area, afraid of being ambushed, so they secretly moved to another place to stay overnight. Our resolution was that if the enemy stayed, we would attack. If they moved on, we would follow them and decide the next move based on the situation. From 3 p.m., we took turns pressing the traps and setting up our positions on the hill. We worked hard on digging trenches until dusk. The darkness restricted our visibility, so we decided to take the risk and approach their position, about 50 meters away, in the abandoned area. The flashlight beam still flickered, and at 7:30 p.m., as the hills and grass faded into darkness, we noticed enemy movement. They walked in a single file, passing quietly near us and heading west toward the stream. Anthuk instructed me to count how many of them there were. I observed each soldier as they passed and silently counted. 34 soldiers in total. After the last soldier passed, we were ordered to follow them. About 20 minutes later, the enemy stopped. Their flashlights illuminated the ground just enough for us to see the grass flattening. We thought they might be settling in for the night, so we waited a little longer to ensure they wouldn't move. An Thuk told me and Hoa to return to meet with An Tap, who was waiting for us at the tea house. More than an hour later, we arrived. By nightfall, we saw the enemy bustling around, some coming and going, their flashlights illuminating the ground as they prepared to sleep. They spread tarps on the grass and set up their camp in the bushes. After a while, it seemed like the enemy had finished setting up their camp, and the flashlights no longer moved around. We assumed they were already in their tents, but a few soldiers remained sitting, smoking and whispering. The end of their cigarettes flickered like fireflies, making their heads appear like ghostly lights in the dark. The night air grew colder with each passing minute as we hid in the grass, enduring the enemy's occasional movements. Hua, sitting next to me, kept looking around, and I gently tapped his arm to get his attention. It seemed like someone had lit a cigarette. I whispered, "Is there anyone moving around now?" He responded, still straining to hear the crackling sound of dry twigs. Around 10 p.m., the soldiers who had been smoking entered the tents, and there were no guards left outside. On Tap formed the team to move closer to the enemy's position. We set up in a half circle, surrounding their sleeping area. At 10:30 p.m., we launched a surprise attack. Gunshots rang out, accompanied by flashes of light and the deafening noise of grenades and mortars. The enemy hardly retaliated. Only 2 or 3 of them panicked and ran into the bushes. We followed them, taking cover behind military gear, and set fire to the area. Explosions ignited U.S. grenades and AR-15 rounds as we maintained a safe distance to avoid shrapnel. We continued firing AK rounds as the blaze intensified. The battle lasted about 10 minutes, and we left the area, ensuring there would be no retaliation from the enemy the next day. We retreated to the forest edge through the night. The next day, the enemy fired continuous artillery at the surrounding hills, while armed helicopters circled above, dropping grenades and firing machine guns into the ravines and along the riverbanks. After the battle, An Tap returned to base, while we stayed behind to track the enemy. By the third day, the situation had changed. We returned to observe the area and confirmed that the enemy had been replaced by a new force. They had set up sandbags and were building barbed wire fences. We reported this to the battalion command and received orders to continue following the enemy. The next day, a fire support unit came to assist. They brought 4 mortars and 2 B-41 gunners. By the 5th day, we guided them through the forest and prepared for the assault. At 8 p.m., we positioned ourselves near the hilltop. The light from the enemy's camp glowed, with some lights as dim as oil lamps and others as bright as electric lamps. 2 heavy machine guns covered the sides while 2 guards sat still on sandbags. The fire support team was ready to strike. At around 9 p.m., the enemy's camp went dark. Suddenly, explosions and gunfire erupted from the hills, with rockets lighting up the area. The enemy soldiers were caught off guard as they tried to escape. We quickly withdrew to avoid counterattack, and within 30 minutes, we were back at the forest edge. In less than a week, we had delivered two devastating blows to the enemy. The next few days, they didn't return to the area. We went back to check, but all we found was the remains of the destroyed camp, charred rubble and piles of ashes. There were no more sounds of the wild rooster crowing. The bombings had silenced it forever. In early November 1972, the enemy returned to occupy the area, but they faced continuous fire from an 82mm mortar unit. By mid-December, they withdrew again. On January 27, 1973, the Paris Peace Accords were signed, and our unit left the battlefield to reinforce another area. There we had more ambushes, and every name we gave to these places, like Deer Meadow or Nai Rung, carried a story or a joke from the young soldiers. These names never appeared on maps, but they lived on in our memories as unforgettable experiences of the war.